Hello, everybody. This is a presentation of Chapter 1 of Ancient Dacia by Nicolae Densusianu. Before I begin, I will note that it's a very weird chapter in the way it's structured. It has three components. One is the actual reading component, two is a description of the different epochs, and three is the references. The references make up the bulk of this chapter, so I have decided to separate every section into separate sections. This way, it's easier to understand, it's easier to present, it's just plain easier. First, I will start by showing you all the content of the book so you can read for yourself if you don't want to listen to my presentation. So that was the chapter 1 part. In the reference section, it has the epoch section in the first few pages. Here it is. I'm debating how much of this to actually read. Maybe I should just save it for the analysis part. Most of us are aware of this stuff anyways. But his impression, his take on it, very important. I may not capture that if I don't read it. Oh, the red part is the reference part. Each reference is next to its corresponding page number. As you can see, a lot of information. A lot of information. Since we're looking at page 138, the cave lion in the eastern parts of Europe. Did you know lions existed in Europe? And it goes into great detail about that. Yeah, all language symbolize the lion, Simba, the... Anyways. Page 149, it talks about the satiri. I made a separate video on this topic. And that's the end of that. If you want to read for yourself, stop the video now. I start speaking now, reading my own translation. Ancient Dacia, the Quaternary Era, Paleolithic period. The first population of Dacia, the primitive and moral civilization of Europe. Page 131. Dacia, among everything else, presents us an extreme antiquity by studying the ancient times of the countries near the Carpathian Mountains and the lower Danube. An ancient disappeared world, the cradle of civilization prior to Hellenic times, is revealed before our eyes. Before the populations known in the Greco-Roman antiquity as the Geti or the Getians and the Daci or the Dacians, there was a period of multiple thousands of years. Page 132. A buried history of monumental events whose importance traveled far beyond the borders of this country, the history of a genius nation, powerful and glorious, which long before the time of the Trojans founded the first vast empire of the world, instituted the first cultural unity of Europe, and at the same time set the foundations for the moral and material progress of West Asia, which is also known as Minor Asia or the west of Turkey, and northern Africa. Dacia, this country which was miraculously equipped from nature with the prosperity of a perfect climate and fertile soil, the opera of ancient geologic times, formed on the great road between Europe and Asia, was the first blessed land for the page 133 absolution development of a moral and industrial life of the migratory nations. Dacia, in the history of these darkened times, appears as the first geographical metropolis, which was destined due to its specific location, the abundance of the population, and its diversity, to extend its ethnic and cultural influence in ancient times, one part to the south, to the Balkan Peninsula and beyond the Aegean Sea, another part towards the west, on the lands connected by the long and great path of the Danube River. The civilizing action, which was exercised by the ancient population prior to the Dacians from the Carpathian and lower Danube area, imposed on the world prior to Hellenic times, was far greater than we can possibly imagine today based on the remaining fragments of monuments, historic and national traditions, which we still have from this faraway epoch. In this regard, we find ourselves only in the dawn of ancient science. Page 136. Here we start the study of these primitive and mysterious times on a new path and very difficult, with the point of view of the beginnings of civilization in Dacia. The first thing which is presented here is in which epoch are the first signs of human existence presented in Dacia. Today, as a result of relentless investigations which were done in past times by the three sister sciences, prehistoric geology, paleontology, and archaeology, the fact is certain and indisputable that man was spread out over a large surface of our globe since the beginning of the Quaternary Age, that he was living simultaneously in all parts of Europe, in Belgium, France, Germany, Austria, England, Italy, and Russia, with the great and powerful mammoths which became extinct in the Diluvian epoch, that Man from this epoch did not know the use of metals and did not have the use of instruments more perfected other than those cut from stone in a brute way and those that are animal bones fabricated in an entirely primitive way. Page 137. In other words, prehistoric science established today in full that man lived and was present in Europe through all the phenomena that characterized the entire Quaternary epoch. He saw the violent acts of nature in these distant times. He was an eyewitness when massive icebergs covered the tall mountains, the valleys, and even a part of the plains of Europe. He considered the potential inundations as a result of the diluvian floods and was present for the last orogenic movements of the earth when the chains of mountains were still growing in height and accumulating a greater width. In these distant geologic times start the first pages of history of man in Dacia. What is right is that until today, in the diluvian deposits of Dacia there was never found skeleton remains of the Dacian Quaternary man. Still, other important remains were found of his existence and activities, which forms an unshaken conviction that man lived, page 138, in a part of the Dacian countries, then when his miserable life conditions made him fight with the gigantic bear and the ferocious lion, page 139, for the rule of the caverns, when he, for the improvement of his material state, was forced to kill the wild horse, to catch the furious ox, page 140, and to confront the mammoth and other powerful and ferocious animals without any weapons other than those that he could find in his own imagination. Page 141. Material probes in this regard are provided by the sciences specializing in the man from this epoch. Page 142. On the territory of the city Miskolc, situated on the lap of the North Carpathians, on the upper part of Tisei, in the commune Borsod, likewise on the territory of Romania today, in Vlaska County, there has been discovered weapons or instruments of flint representing two Paleolithic types. Page 144. Calice or Saint Acheul from France, and the instruments are characteristic of the interglaciary Quaternary epoch. Other than these artifacts that prove the existence and homes of the Quaternary man in the Dacian countries, there also exist strong ethnologic reasons based on the geographic extension of the European man from this epoch, which is presumed through the words that man in the Quaternary times, the interglaciary period, was acclimatized in all of Europe. Page 145. We can't, therefore, from no point of view, neither paleontologic or archaeological, limit the geographic location of Quaternary man to the poles of the northwest Carpathians, and to separate from an anthropologic point of view the Dacian countries of Central and West Europe. Page 146. Still, what was the position in nature, the habits and standard of life of the human race in the Paleolithic period in Europe? Here we are presented with one of the most important and at the same time complicated things of the primitive ethnology of Europe. Page 147. Scientific results which numerous paleontological investigations offer us, made until today in the geologic terrains of the Quaternary epoch, presents us in Europe two main human species, each on different evolutionary pathways of physical and intellectual evolution. One of these two races is presented through a partial skull dug out from Cannstatt, near Stuttgart, in the year 1700, studied in 1835, Likewise, though, another important specimen through the cranium found in the Neanderthal cave near Dusseldorf in 1856. Both of these human fossils reveal to us through an anthropologic point of view the same ethnic characteristics and are today generally recognized as Neanderthal and is considered as the human race in the Mammoth epoch. This primitive race, human, is presented with general characteristics dolichoplatycephaly, in other words, with a long and depressed head, narrow and oblique forehead or thrown backwards, and the eyebrows arcs extremely developed. Neanderthal man or Kronstadt was of short stature rather than long. They were stocky and robust, short and muscular limbs, and based on their osteological constitution, based on the opinions of anthropologists today, that they were halfway leaning towards their knees, just like anthropoids. Page 148. From every point of view, we will analyze this Neanderthal skull, says the English naturalist Professor Huxley. It represents to us all the characteristics of a monkey and is truly the most monkey-like human cranium that has been found until today. Also, to this primitive human species from the Mammoth epoch also belongs the human fossils found in 1866 in the Spy Cave in Belgium. The exhumed skeletons found at Spy are without question from the Mammoth epoch, and they present us the same anatomic and osteologic characteristics of Neanderthal. Everywhere, the Spy type, from the point of view of organic evolution, reveals to us the European man from the Mammoth epoch as the most minuscule physical and intellectual conditions. Of these primitive European inhabitants, the following words of Lucretius are stated. Then, in those first times of the history of humanity, the human type was much more harsh, as he had to be. In the course of multiple thousands of years of the sun's revolutions in the sky, they had the lifestyle of wild animals everywhere. They did not know how to use fire, nor how to use ash, or how to cover their bodies with the fur of wild animals. They lived in the forests, in mountain caves, and in the great kodri, which are very old woods, maybe a reference to tree size, hiding beneath brier, which are known as shrubs, and bushes, their body parts dirtied. Then when they had to defend themselves from the winds and rains, they were unable to consciously work together for common interests, nor were they able to establish common principles, nor to use any laws, and each put their hands on prey, which luck brought in front of them, and then ran away with it, pushed by their own instincts, as each had to take care of themselves and only worry about themselves. This prehistoric tradition maintained by the old Latin population is explained by Virgil. Once, says Virgil, there used to live in these woods a race of people born, page 149, of the hard trunks of the oak trees, the Fauni. They had no morals or religion. They did not know how to utilize a yoke on oxen, nor how to gather material possessions, nor to maintain well whatever they obtained, and lived in a wild way only with branches and with hunting. Page 150. The second fossil human race from the Quaternary epoch is represented through the cranium and bone fossils first found in the Cro-Magnon station of the Valley Vézéroulie from France. This human race, which in anthropology is named Cro-Magnon after the Paleolithic station or field, in which it was exhumed, dominates with certainty the western parts of Europe at the end of the Quaternary epoch, and it is presented in terms of physiology and intellectual capability as much more superior to the Neanderthal race. Cro-Magnon people, constituted after paleontologic studies, pretty and dolichocephalic, strong. That's a reference to how the skull is structured. It's like an oval shape. It's like a cone head shape. Strong and intelligent. In particular, they were different from the race Neanderthal Kronstadt spied through a wide forehead and a deep oblique. Page 151. Through the dimensions of its skull, through the lack of arches for the eyebrows, through a face likewise wide, and through a tall height of 178 to 185 centimeters for the men, about 6 feet tall. Everywhere, the fossil race of Cro-Magnon, judging it after its intelligent type, after the remains of its industry and conditions of life, possessed a significant grade of semi-civilization. Page 152. Alongside the cutting of stone, the industry, which presents us a variety of forms, the primitive civilization of Cro-Magnon is also characterized through a greatly expanded fabrication of items made out of animal bones and horns. More so, some tribes of this race possessed a great knowledge of engraving and sculptures. Finally, Cro-Magnon people knew in a rudimentary mode the art of the fabrication of clay pots, and there exists even some indications that they started to understand the importance of some grains, such as rice and wheat. But one of the great characteristics of this quaternary race was the application and its tendency manifested through different forms to put under the empire of man somewhat different species of animals. In Paleolithic science of this population, we are presented with the first signs of semi-domestication of some animals, specifically the horse, ox, and what I think is the stag. This fossil race of Cro-Magnon, which appears still in the Quaternary epoch through a remarkable physical evolution, can understand no circumstance to be considered as an improvement of the European pithecoid type of Neanderthal. On the contrary, all physical and moral qualities reveal to us the Cro-Magnon people as more of an invasionary race. In any case, the appearance of this prehistoric race in Europe is presented to us much older than it was considered until now. The groups of Cro-Magnon fossils appear in the Quaternary epoch spread out throughout different parts of old Gallia, likewise in the Iberic Peninsula, in a part of northwest Africa, and up to the Canary Islands. Even the first flint instruments, and which prehistoric archaeology considers to be from the start of the Quaternary epoch or Kelly's type, which presents a relatively regulated and oftentimes elegant form, do not appear to be fabricated by the indocile race of Neanderthal, but the opera of a far more superior type of people. Page 153. Of all the types and the grades of maturity of the Cro-Magnon race, their application for the domestication of animals, the coincidence of their homes being in the same places as Neolithic populations, finally the ornamental industry of this race, all of these considerations reveal to us the Cro-Magnon race as more of a detached branch in those mysterious times of the Tertiary era, as a stem of the what I think is Paleogene period, of which the great invasion happened in Europe around the start of the Neolithic period. So we established the following. The human period in Dacia, just like other parts of Europe, goes back several tens of thousands of years, at least to the first half of the Quaternary epoch. In other words, before the Abi and the Agavi, of which the Iliad of Homer reminds us, before the Titans of which Hesiod speaks, there lived in Europe and specifically Dacia two races of people with different physical features and morals, one on the lowest grade of physical and intellectual evolution. This is the Neanderthal race, a type of people without society, without morals and rules, and whose origin we don't know, and another invasionary human race, totally distinct from the precedent, having a much more evolved physical constitution and having reached a significant semi-grade of civilization, a faunica, which might mean the fauni, which is related to the Satiri. This is where I'm starting to question if these Cro-Magnon people are the Satiri. A faunica population whose migrations and beginnings of culture pass well beyond the Quaternary epoch times. Both of these human quaternary races were then overwhelmed, conquered, and destroyed, and perhaps in small part assimilated by the new invaders of the Neolithic period. Their moral history, and we can say natural, ends with the Quaternary era. They had no influence over the following epochs. That's the end of the chapter 1. Let's see what the epochs are now. Page 131. 1. Prehistoric epochs. The long period and absence of light, which refers to the human genome on the surface of our globe, starting with the first material signs of industry of man and until the time when man was able to write for all, following humanity the most important and worthy writings worth memorizing, is called the prehistoric epoch. This great prehistoric era is subdivided from an archaeological point of view in the following three smaller epochs. 1. Stone Epoch, which is the first greater period of prehistory, when man found himself totally inferior from a cultural point of view, when he did not know how to use metals and fabricated his instruments and offensive and defensive weapons only from wood, stone, from bone, and animal horns. The Stone Age, with the point of view of the general progression of the human industry, contains by itself two smaller epochs. The first one is the Old Stone Age or the Paleolithic, also known as the Archaeolithic, also named the Cut Stone Period. And the second age is the New Stone Age or the Neolithic. The first period, the Paleolithic, is characterized through weapons and instruments of stone, worked in a brute way and totally primitive, and the Neolithic period presents us from all points of view a much greater progress, a superior technique, and a variety of forms much more abundant than the precedent epoch. The weapons and instruments of stone and bone from this period are worked with much greater care and usually are gilded. From a chronological point of view, the Paleolithic corresponds with the Quaternary era of the geologists and with the part of the Tertiary epoch from which we have found stone objects suspected of being cut by an intelligent being known as pierre éclatée, which I think is French. And the start of the Neolithic period corresponds with the disappearance of the Cherbul Terend, I think that's a stag, and from the central and occidental parts of Europe. After the Stone Age follows in the ancient countries of Dacia the intermediary epoch of brass or copper. I say brass or copper because the Romanian word arama could mean both when translated in English. We all know it's the Copper Age, but that does not rule out brass. So I will just say brass/copper moving forward. It is characterized through instruments and weapons fabricated out of pure brass/copper. Page 132. Most of these artifacts of brass/copper have the same shape as those from the Stone Age. There's a reference listed here of what you can see. The brass/copper period is succeeded in the Dacian countries by the prehistoric period of bronze, when this metallic composition of brass/copper and tin was used for the fabrication of all kinds of sharp weapons and instruments. Finally, the Iron Age follows, in which this metal occupied the place of bronze for the fabrication of weapons, axes, knives, etc. The Iron Age is considered as prehistoric only in the utilization of this metal. The transition from the Stone Age to the Metal Age happened in a progressive mode and very slowly. People continued to use weapons and instruments of stone in the entire Bronze Age and even in the Iron Age. The famous naturalist Francis G. de Mortillet, 1898, divided the Paleolithic period from an archaeological point of view in the following periods, which are characterized in general by specific types of instruments of stone, especially flint. The first epoch is called the Celina epoch, which represents the inferior quaternary and which forms a paleontologic point of view, is characterized by the bones of the great cave bears and the ancient elephant. The characteristics of flint instruments from this epoch is called coupe de poing, or having an almond shape more or less, one head more sharpened and another more round. Page 133. The second epoch, or the Mousteriense epoch, which represents the middle quaternary and corresponds to the Mammoth epoch. The stone tools from this period present us two typical forms. One of these forms is a simple continuation of the typical characteristic from the previous period, or coupe de poing, having a sharp head, and the other with a brute base. The second Mousteriense type is characterized in this period by instruments meant to cut wood and skins. The third epoch, known as the Solutrean epoch, excuse me, I think my throat is requiring water. Water, baby. Fresh, sweet water. Not salt or dead water. Sweet water. The Solutrean epoch, which was only a short period and with a much more localized character. It coincides with the end of the Mammoth Age and the start of what I think is the Stag epoch. Please correct me if I'm wrong. The typical characteristic of the flint instruments from this epoch are in the form of bay leaves. The fourth epoch, known as the Magdalene epoch or superior quaternary, which corresponds with the stag, and is characterized especially by greatly increased fabrication of things made from bone and deer horns. These four subdivisions of the superior quaternary received their names after the famous Paleolithic stations in France: Kelis, Les Moustiers, Solutré, and Madeleine. Open parenthesis, different archaeological types from all these prehistoric epochs can be seen at De Mortillet, Musée Préhistorique, Paris, 1833. Close parenthesis. I will analyze if this museum still exists in the analysis video. Still, the archaeological classification of the Quaternary era, as was fixated by G. de Mortillet, is still exposed to some controversies and in reality does not correspond in full to all the facts and cannot be applied for all European countries. To determine the results of prehistoric archaeology is absolutely necessary to know these classifications, which today is the most adopted. The following table will expose even more the reports which exist between the prehistoric epochs and the geological and paleontological classifications. I'm not going to read this. Take a look yourself. It should all be corresponding to the content I just read. To try to read this would be, which I've tried already. I canceled the video right before this one, trying to read this. I'm not going to do it again. It's too confusing for me to say it out loud, so just look at it. It's two separate charts. They're actually one and the same chart, it's just he couldn't fit it all on one page. And that concludes the epochs section. So, reminder, it's based on the 4 locations of Paleolithic science: Kelly's, Le Moustier, Solutre, and Madeleine. Now, the reference section for anyone that's still around, because this is the best part of it all, other than that last page of the chapter, which gave a final conclusion. Anyways, page 136, Cartel Hack, his book. 2. The length of the Quaternary Age. Science has not yet been able to fixate a chronological timeline of the duration of the geological epochs. As elements of appreciation, only 2 things can serve as a base. One option is that the general geological events were produced in a relatively short time and specifically through an extreme intensity or fast of the forces of nature. The second option is that these forces of nature gained a real form only in a gradual mode over a long period of time. The second option of a slow, gradual progression of the forces of nature dominates today in the field of science. In this regard, Cartel Hack, in his book, expresses himself in the following way. And it's a French quote which I could loosely translate, so I'll put it here. The ones who agree with the second option have to clearly and thoroughly explain why they chose the second option as the way the forces of nature progressed in the Quaternary Age with the attribute of an immense period of time. This is where I got the idea to make that question for a geochronologist video. Because these are the 2 options. 1, that things happen very fast, and 2, things happen very slow. Modern science says many millions of years, even billions of years to accomplish some geological processes, but did it really? Show me the proof, because I'm not sure science can. So, geochronologists, please answer my question. Page 137. Reference 1. A geological Romanian tradition. In Romanian folklore stories, we are often, in case you don't know, folklore is just traditions passed by word of mouth, not written down on paper. In Romanian folklore stories, we are oftentimes presented with a vague memory about the orogenic accidents that happened on the surface of our globe in distant geological epochs, when the mountain chains were becoming longer and colliding with each other. This phenomena is characterized in the old traditions of the Romanian people with the words, when the mountain butted heads, or where the mountains butted heads. And the references, books and fairy tales and legends and stories. and Romanian people themselves from the Apușani Mountains, and even a magazine from the year 1886. Geologic science constitutes today that the different chains of mountains, even one and the same mountain, do not form all at once and are only the opera of multiple orogenic movements. So the battle of the mountains reminds us the consecutive raising, butting, and overall movements of the surface crust of the earth which happen in geologic times. I will analyze this orogenic movement idea in the analysis. Page 138, reference 1. The cave lion, also known as Felis spelaea, in the eastern parts of Europe. Different cave lion remains were found in Transylvania in the Almas cave near the river Homorod in the district of Odorheiu. By the way, before I continue, these references that the man is using is validating his entire book. Okay? Many books are written that are pure assumptions, pure ideas that people have, just like most of the videos I presented until this book were my ideas. These references are facts, okay? All the references are facts. Do not just skip them. They are nuggets of gold. You could end up reading a whole new book based on these references, or understanding where something like the word septentrionalis comes from. I hope you get this now. I will not mention this again. So different cave lions remains were found in Transylvania in the Almas cave near the river Homorod in the district of Odorheiu. Sir John Lubbock, in his famous opera L'Homme Préhistorique, page 267, tells us that John Haynes published in 1672 the sketch of a bone found in the Carpathian Mountains. Other quaternary remains from the species of lion were found in newer times in the area of Porax in the Zips county in the north part of the Carpathians in Hungary, according to Nyári az Teleki. The Vienna Museum of Natural History possesses the most complete skeleton of this powerful predator, which was found in the Sloop cave from Moravia, which means its geographic zone extended all the way past the northern Carpathians in our area. The cave lion lived in the eastern parts of Europe until late in historic times. Herodote, the father of Greek history, in his, let's call it manuscript, book, whatever, recalls the interesting event how around 482 AD, when Xerxes, the son of Darius Hystaspes, passed through Thracia and Macedonia with his formidable army to conquer Greece, more groups of lions coming down from the mountains attacked the camels at night, which carried the baggages of the troops, leaving the people and the other transport animals untouched. The geographical zone of these lions from the Balkan Peninsula was in this time, as Herodote tells us, between the river Nestus, today Karasu, from Thracia, and Achelou, today Aspropotamos from Acarnia. In other words, the Rhodope Mountains and the Pindus Mountains, and Herodote adds at the same time, only in these parts do lions get born in Europe. I will analyze this in my analysis video. Page 139. Different traditions about the European lion exist even today in our old heroic folklore. As so, in Romanian carols, one of the most ancient types of our folklore is celebrated even today, just like in the times of Evandru, which might be Evander. I'll analyze this in the analysis video. The heroism of June or Hercules, who fought the lion. And now there are some carols. I'll read one, see how it goes. Take me to the top of the river to show you a mean dog which bites and mangles and kills anyone from under the sun. It is not a dog, he found out, but an old sleeping lion. The person that said this was Marianescu in his book Colinde, which translates to Carols, page 136. Carol number 2. Lua Miller, or Ler Miller, was going. Great miracles he was doing. After the mountain of the sheep, he met the lion and fought to catch him. But Miller in his speech said, I will capture it, pessimist. Bring me my lance, long as 9 kots. That's a kot means elbow, and it used to be a unit of measurement. I'm not sure exactly how long that is. I guess I'll analyze it. And as wide as possible, and the servants brought it to him, and in the lion he stuck it, and he was screaming in pain. It jumped into the tall grass, then stayed in one spot and did not die, So my issue of these carols is very old slang or phrases that I don't think I'll be able to properly translate. But the idea is that these carols speak about lions in Romanian folklore, and so do these songs. And you can read them. I'm not gonna embarrass myself anymore. In the old language, Simha is the lion. To the Romanian people, Samka is the name given in ancient times to the leopard. Likewise, it is remembered in our. So, not only lions, we also have leopards in Romania. Okay. Likewise, it is remembered in our heroic songs about lions, which existed once in the area around the Nistru, especially in the wildness of Lower Basarabia, which is Moldavia today, which in the Romanian epochs was considered the desert of the Geti or Getai or Gauls. So the ballad, can't understand the title, blah blah, next page, page 140. One, or reference 1. This primitive ox, also known as Bos primigenius, contemporary of the quaternary man, had a massive waist, almost twice the size of our domestic ox, and was part of the Sura bovine race, which live today in the Romanian countries, Transylvania, Hungary, Styria, which is an Austrian province, and Russia. The race of wild oxen lived in our parts until historic times. Herodotus tells us the following. There is in these parts of Macedonia, Rhodope and Pindus mountains, many lions and wild oxen, followed by a Greek word. The horns of these oxen are of a gigantic proportion, and they are important to Greece as a thing of commerce. And then where Herodotus wrote this. This wild ox, which Herodotus tells us about, is depicted with particular beauty and natural vigor on the gold pottery found at Vapio near Sparta and the murals from Tirint from the times of the Peloponnesian Pelasgic dynasty. And then another reference, including an encyclopedia. The genius Caesar, who in his vast plans for the expansion of the Roman Empire was the first to study, from a military perspective, the lands of the northern Danube, tells us in his own comments the following. There still exists in Germany another species of ox, wild, which are named Uri. These oxen are a little smaller than elephants, still after their form, after type and color they are similar to bulls. Their power is great, and great is also their velocity. They do not spare man or wild beasts which they ever see. People, to be able to catch them, dig holes in the ground after a specific system, and then in the same holes kill them. And then the reference, which apparently belonged to Caesar, which I'm assuming he got from the Vatican libraries because Densusianu spent like 9 months in the Vatican libraries, something which none of us will ever get to do. Likewise, writes Isidore, Archbishop of Seville, in 636 AD, I think. Uri are a species of wild oxen, also known as Uri agrestes boves, from Germany, having massive horns and which are used to make glasses for drinking for royal dinners, their inner capacity being enormous. And then what Isidore wrote, his reference. Getae, as we know, similarly use the ox horns to drink wine. And then reference to Diodor Siculli, page 141. What just happened? What just happened? What just happened? Oh, I see what happened. Sorry about that. I have had many obstacles trying to prevent me from making this video. I am not stopping now. I almost sounded like Apu from Homer Simpson. The Simpsons. Page 141. The naturalist Pliny, or Pliny the Elder, in his text, tells us the following about the fauna of Scythia and Germany. Scythia produces few animals because here the bushes are missing. Likewise, few animals are in Germany, country which is neighbor with Scythia. Still, in Germany there exists an important wild ox species known as Bovum ferorum genera, specifically the bisons with their hair crests on their backs, and Uri, gifted with an extraordinary force and velocity in which the ignorant nation calls wild bivoli or bubali. I'm assuming they were referring to the Germans. As we know, Big Germany, or Barbarian Germany, according to the Latin authors, was neighbor with Dacia. Do you understand how important Dacia was? And it was never mentioned in schools, but everybody knows about the Germans and the Gauls and manipulation of history. Oh, and the Austro-Hungarian Empire and the Golden Hordes, and I apologize. I'm having a moment where I feel extreme frustration how the entire history of the Dacians, my ancestors, was wiped out. I'm back to normal. So, Germany was neighbor with Dacia. More so, the Hercynica or Hercynian forest of Caesar and ethnographic Germany of Tacit or Tacitus also extended over the North Carpathians of Hungary and Transylvania. So the geographic area of the bisons and Uri from the Roman epoch included the mountainous regions of not only Germany but also Dacia. Some evidence of this we have from the history of the Dacian wars. Suidas writes Jove or Jove or Jupiter also has the name Cassius after the mountain Cassius, and to him Emperor Trajan or Trajan dedicates some silver cups and the horn of an ox of an extraordinary proportion coated with gold, a gift of his first win against the Geti. On these gifts is found the following epigram written by Adrian: To Jove or Jovi Cassius I dedicate these Trajan gifts from the bloodline of Aenea, which might be Aeneas, I'll have to analyze that. Emperor of the people, Emperor of the sky. Now going back to Saturn is not Satan analysis, now we have a name, Aeneas, Emperor of the Sky. I have to research that. And Sebastian Munsterus, in his book, writes, in Silvis, which was an old name for Transylvania, and then there's a Latin quote. And then the Urus ox of the Latin authors was, after the unanimous opinions of the naturalists of today, one and the same with the primitive ox or diluvio, known as Bos primigenius. In the oldest monuments of our literary folklore, specifically in chorales and ballads, the primitive ox, or Bos primigenius, or Bos urus, appears under the name Bowl Sur, or the Sur ox. Here's one of those carols, I guess. Here comes the sea, how great it is, but of sea margins it does not have, with the molifti, which are resinous arbus, aligned on the sides, swimmers swim, and Bowl Sur, or the Sur ox. I'm not going to read any more of these because, again, hard to translate these phrases, but the idea is that the word sur, sur, in reference to the bows or boss, has meaning. And then he says, here the title of sur is a Romanian archaic word from the same root as the Celtic urus, and with the meaning of wild or of the mountain. The old symbolism of Moldova contained the figure of the head of Urus, but not of the bison with a crest. You can also check Bolyak Buciumu, his book. Next is the Servus Megaceros in Romanian tradition. Between the different species of quaternary fauna, which populated in great part the plains and mountains of Dacia in this epoch, there was also the so-called Servus Megaceros. This pre-diluvian deer, the most magnificent of the extinct fauna, lived in Europe and especially in Ireland until the 12th century of our era. The great arched horns which decorated its head were gigantic and gave it an imposing figure. Page 142. It is remembered in the Iliad and the Odyssey of Homer, Ulysses or Odysseus is hunting on the white island of the nymph Circe, a great deer with tall horns or antlers, a gigantic monster, and then a Greek phrase and a reference to Odyssey of Homer. Different traditions about Servus Megaceros have been maintained until today in the old monuments of our national literature. So, in the semi-religious chorals of the Romanian people, it is often remembered of a noble and towering deer named Bulsur, or Romanian Old Expression. Oh, followed by a Romanian Old Expression which I cannot understand, which after the beauty and size and the qualities attributed to it can be none other than the greatest deer that has ever existed on the face of the earth, the Cervus megaceros. Then there are some poems. One is about how fast this animal can run. Oh, the next one is a good one. The velocity of this deer being so great, the hunters from the Romanian carols prayed to God for rain, for the ground to become soft, and the deer to become muddied to be able to catch it. Then there's a poem about the previous sentence. This Romanian tradition about how the gigantic deer was hunted serves the purpose of clarifying a curious fact which paleontologists until today cannot explain. In Hungary, the majority of the skeletons of Cervus megaceros were found in the shiny layers near the edges of the Tisza. Let's call it the beach, even if there isn't a beach, because it's a river. Banks, there we go, the banks of the Tisza. In Ireland, as Figuier tells us, his book, the skeletons of this ancient animal are found in the muddy deposits of the Curragh, or plains, and it is worth noting, says Figuier, that almost all these skeletons are found in the same position, with the head raised upwards, the neck stretched out, the horns or antlers touching the back, as if the animal got covered in mud in a muddy terrain and struggled until its last moment to get another breath of fresh air. The epithet of sur, which is often applied to this ancient deer, is usually used in Romanian stories and poems only for gigantic and enchanted animals. That's why it is said sur, like for the ox, or it was bowl sur, and then sur vulture, and so on. And then more references to Romanian folklore and books. This epithet belongs to the ancient Romanian language, and it is not only a synonym, but also identical with the Celtic urus, adding at the beginning the Pelasgic pronunciation. Servius, in his book, says Latin sentence. From the point of view of understanding, cervo, which means deer, sur, so sur deer, depicts none other than cervo deer of the codrului, which means forest, or runcului, which means meadow, or muscelului, which means hillock. So it's the sur of the forest, the meadow, and the hillock. Page 143, show book. Why am I showing the book? Let me see. Okay. These are some Okay, so this says flint type instruments, Kelly's type from Miskolc, the commune Bodrog in Hungary. Half the linear size, and then this is the reference. Flint instruments. I will analyze this in the analysis video too. 8 is an triangular flint instrument, Kelly's type, same place. And 9 is another flint instrument, Kelly's type, Romania, and the location. This is the real size. So this is half the size. The top ones are half the size. This one is the real size. So this one is super small, 7 centimeters long by 5 centimeters wide. Antiquities Museum, Bucharest. Page 144. Reference 1. Studying the collection of prehistoric artifacts from the Museum of Antiquities in Bucharest, I observed under the number 66 a flint instrument cut with the characteristics of Kelly's, which was placed in a location that contained other flint instruments, indicated in the drawer under the general name Stone Age, Vlaska County. I photographed this precious instrument for the quaternary archaeology, and we reproduce it here for the first time. In regards to explaining the origins of this instrument, speaking the director of the museum, Georgi Tocilescu, I received from him the following information. The photographed flint instrument was found in the locality of Vlaska County on the beach of Nezhlovu near Great Krivedia in the point named Cetatea Fetei, which in English means kind of like city or county of the girl. The size of the Kelly's type instruments in general varies greatly. This way Mortelet, in his book, shows us some flint instruments from this epoch cut with the dimensions 4 centimeters, 8 millimeters, 5 centimeters, 6 centimeters by 2 millimeters length. In other words, smaller than how the flint from Romania, figure 9, is cut. And Kartalhak, in his book, writes that he saw some Kelly's instruments, some so bulky and others on the contrary so small, that it raised the question whether the hand of man could use them with success. These quaternary flint objects, Kelly's type, are found not only in river deposits, but also on the surface of the earth, specifically the higher parts, mixed with other parts from all the other epochs. And this is according to Zaborowski in his book. Reference 2. Other different archaeologic and paleontological elements with the point of view of the coexistence of man in the Dacian countries, with the great mammoths from the Quaternary epoch are remembered and appreciated in just show reference to page 144. Reference 2. Oh, I remember. I'm showing this reference because there's a lot of names here for where he got his information from, and their works are all in foreign languages. And it continues up to 150, 160. So it's this. See how much this book sucks? Was uploaded in Photoshop, so I literally have to type out every single word. I can't just copy and paste them to like an auto translate. Not that it would work, but still. So that and this section is what I told myself to show you guys. Why does this happen? Page 145. Without question, says the distinct archaeologist of Transylvania, Dr. Ant Koch. Please, no profanity here. Prehistoric man lived in the Mammoth epoch on Transylvanian land, and his text. The deceased sea goose, again, it's not a goose, it's the guy's name, okay? Another erudite, which means he's like a freaking genius, archaeologist and historian from Transylvania expresses himself this way. German quote at his reference. But I'm telling you, he's a genius, okay? In regards to Romania, Caesar Bolyak, based on his own prehistorical archaeological investigation, says the following. There was in Dacia the polished Stone Age and the only chipped stone epoch. The Bronze Age also touched this area, and what other countries could not say, after prehistorical findings that we have up to today, that there also was a native red brass / copper age. That's worth investigating for sure. The author also states that among all the findings over the last 4 or 5 years, there was found about 250 flint objects and other stones, among which there is an axe made of petroflint. Gotta investigate that too. Totally primitive from the brute stone epoch. And then the reference. In regards to the Austrian countries, see his own Buffy, and he lists some German quotes and references. Show page 145. Okay. Oh, this section. I'm assuming this is some sort of German. Yeah, only they write like that. Prahistorischen of I'm sorry, I'm not trying to make fun of no languages. It's just entertaining to me to try to pronounce German words. Okay. Reference 1. The internal sea in the Dacian countries in the last geologic times. I actually spoke about this in the video I made just before I will post this video, where I explained the origins of the word septentrionalis. I'm not going to read it again. But it does continue after dead water. Page 146. Even the name of Mureș, which is the primary river of Transylvania. I'm not so sure about that anymore. Requires further analysis. And which appears in medieval documents under the name Mauritius. Some Latin document as a reference. Marusius as another reference. Mauritius as another reference puts into evidence that in the ancient past the basin of this river constituted a dead water, Marusa. So this specific Mureș River was an ocean river, which I spoke about in that other video. On another note, there exists even today an old and widespread tradition that the plains of the Romanian countries and Hungary and the valleys of Transylvania were once covered with an internal sea. I spoke about that as well. As a result, the Chronicle of George Brankovici, written around 1688 to 1690, how did this man know so much information? He's just amazing. contains the following tradition about the sea from the Dacian countries. Quote, this Pompey, which means bigger Pompeii, cut the canal at Byzantia, or Byzantium, that the Black Sea entered the White Sea, and this left the Moldovan country, the Moldovan country, Muntenia, Ardal, dry. I'm going to analyze this also, because he's saying that the Black Sea went into the White Sea. Well, that's interesting. This tradition that the Black Sea in a distant epoch did not have an outlet is also mentioned by the peripatetic Strato of Lampsacus in 270 AD. The Black Sea, he says, was once totally closed off, and the canal from Byzantium opened up after massive pressure of the water masses as a result of great amounts of water from the rivers leading to the Pontus Euxine, or the Black Sea. Likewise, says Strato, the same happened with the Mediterranean Sea, which after a great accumulation of water, river water, broke the western barrier and then flowed into the external sea. The lacustrine, or lakes, flowed out and dried up first in Europe by Strabo. Another tradition almost identical with that of the Chronicle of Brankovici is told to us from Prahova County, Habud commune. We heard from the elders that the land on which we live was a sea of water, and only in the mountains lived some wild men, which our ancestors beat up and placed us instead. Sounds like a genocide to me, by some super advanced race. Our Emperor Trajan freed the water from here to Baba Kaya, wherever that is. We note here that in the Romanian traditions, Hercules often appears under the name Troian D. When there used to be water here, people moved about the rowboats and ships. It is said that Kula from Verset was made in those times. From there it could be seen from a kula, which means circular tower or dome, for fishing on the Danube, and another on the Mureș. When an enemy rowboat was coming, a big light was lit up at the top of the kula, which might be circular tower, so that our brothers could know that the enemies came to our country. End quote. We also note here that a folklore tradition from Hungary that the plains of this country was once covered by water, which later drained out through the waterways at the Iron Gates. I need to analyze that too. And then some book where it was taken from reference. Page 147, picture 10, picture 11. Okay, let's see. Picture 10 is a Neanderthal cranium seen from the front after Bertrand from his book La Gaule, page 72. 11 is the same thing, same book, same person, page 70, except it's a profile of the cranium or side view. Nothing fancy here, but I must study Neanderthal and Cro-Magnon and see what has improved in terms of knowledge in the last 100 years. Reference 1, Cartel Hack, his book. Then there's Frappuant, his book. Bertrand, his book. Then Mortiller, his book. Page 148, Huxley, his book. Reference 2, Cartel Hack, his book. Also Fray Pont, his book, number 3. Lucrezi, his book. 4. Aeneid, his book, page 149. The primitive human race of the satyrs in Europe, Asia, and Africa. I'm just gonna read this to refresh my own memory. In fact, most of these videos, I'm the first viewer, and I watch them in the future as well because there's just so much information. I don't want to forget any of this. Ref 1. Primitive human race of the satyrs in Europe, Asia, and Africa. Antique Roman and Greek literature transmits to us a long tradition of ethnographic stories and traditions in regards to a primitive race of the Satyri. As such, Hesiod, around 850 AD, reminds us in one of his fragments of a species of humans that performed bad deeds, named Satyri, and which were incapable of learning anything relating to humanity. This sounds like Neanderthal. The figure of these Satyri is revealed to us in general as human yet wild and harsh, wild hair, blunt nose and thrown upwards, ears sharpened on the upper part, the neck with some sort of lumps. Nope, not Neanderthal. In the lower part of the spine having a lock of long hairs. More of an exaggeration of the Greek authors. These Satyri lived in the forests and mountains and are portrayed as passionate lovers of women. From an ethnic point of view, the figures of these Satyri in all pictures are more of a Semitic character. Satyri of which Hesiod speaks were also called a Greek word, which in an ethnologic sense is identical with Silvanus. I need to analyze Silvanus. In Romanian, Silha equals forest. In these places, writes Lucretius, his reference, once lived, as the neighbors say, Satyri who with their sounds and games disrupted the quietness of the night. This human primitive race of the Satyri is also remembered in the old geographical descriptions of Asia. In the eastern mountains of India, writes Pliny in his book, in the land of the Karaklusi, there is the Satyri. These Satyri are a very corrupted animal which runs and walks on either 2 legs or all 4 limbs. Their face is like a human's face. Still, because of their agility, they cannot be caught except when they are old or sick. Torrance says, the Koromanzi are a type of wild humans who don't know how to speak, their expressions being only horrible howls. Their bodies are hairy, they have blue eyes, and their canine teeth are very sharp. This retelling of Pliny about the Satyri race from Asia is confirmed almost in full by the new discoveries of anthropology. The naturalist Aide de Mortelet publishes in Revue Encyclopédique from the year 1895, page 73, under the title Some French, a note about the cranium found on the Java island in 1891 by the military medic Eugène Dubois, and then French quote. I have to see if I can find the skull. Maybe it's got horns. Anyways, the Roman geographer Pomponius Mela, in his book, tells us that in the territory of Africa, near Occidentali or West Ethiopia, in between other barbarian and nomadic tribes, there is the Satyri, who have no roofs nor stable homes, who barely resemble man, and are half wild animals. And then some French, or is it Latin? Maybe both. I don't know. Page 150, picture 12. Oh, there we go. Cro-Magnon skull. After Fred Pont, Les Caverns, page 133. Clearly, it's different from Neanderthal, but it's also different from us. To continue, Pliny, as we saw, reminds us that in Asia, other than the satyrs, there was a hairy human species with the canine teeth called tsats, which means sticking out of the mouth. So a vampire's teeth are a good vision, vision, mental vision, mental eye vision. Man who is covered with hair over most of his body also appears in Europe, represented on some engravings at the end of the Quaternary epoch. Again, the Mortale, his book, or the museum, one of those. About hairy people, the traditions from the Roman epoch tell us further details. And then it's Isidori etymology, and also the prophet Isaiah in the text Vulgate. And they both use the word pilosi for hairy people. Anyways, about wild hairy people, Hanon also speaks, Duke of the Carthaginians, who in the epoch of blossoming of his nation went out on an expedition beyond the Pillars of Hercules, and after he returned to Carthagena, he placed in the Temple of Saturn, or Temple of Junona, the skins of two wild hairy women he had caught during his expedition. And then the reference, book, text, whatever. The circumstance is also confirmed by Pliny in his Natural History, saying that Hanon exposed as proof and as a miracle in the temple of Junona from Carthagena the skin of two hairy women that he had caught on his expedition and which could be seen in this temple until the fall of Carthagena. I am going to study Carthagena, not to see some hairy female back skin, but to see these temples. One is the Temple of Saturn, and the other is the Temple of Junona. And Carthagena is part of Phoenicia, or that area. Jews, right? And Junona, wife of Jupiter, and as my good friend said, Jew Peter. It makes sense, right? At, at the Romanian people, there exists even today a series of traditions about a primitive race, hairy and called Tsata, or with the canine sticking out. Page 151. And so in Romanian folklore, which contained precious elements of the prehistoric times, it is oftentimes remembered of a being unknown to previous epochs, of a wild man, usually large, hairy, and constant enemy of today's man. And then there's some folklore about that. Okay, I guess I'll read this one. The big man came from the big forest, hairy man and scary, with hairy hands and hairy legs, with wide open eyes, with the great teeth called sats, with big chicks, with a frightening look. He came during the night, and he came through its needs to scare and, I think that's a name, to shorten his days, to cut his life. And then Mariana, his folklore book. It literally sounds like a vampire coming into the middle of the night, coming to suck the blood out of whomever to cut his life. Doesn't it? So we got the Satyri and the vampires and the Neanderthals and the Cro-Magnon. This hairy man type Satyr and type Pilos. Oh, okay. So that's the official name. Pilosi. Gotcha. Of whose memories have been kept until historical times, constituted the same quaternary epoch primitive family with the Neanderthal race, Kronstadt race, and Spy race. Reference 1. Hartal Hack, his book, De Mortale, his book, Bertrand, his book, Fred Pond, his book. Page 152. Reference 1. Fred Pond, his book, Bertrand, his book. Reference 2. The horse appears domesticated in the Solutrean epoch. On different quaternary epoch engravings he appears with the bridle in his mouth. On a fragment of corn discovered in France at Toursac, or Dordogne, there is an engraving of a man with a bat over his shoulder as a caretaker of horses. Likewise, at the end of the quaternary epoch, we are presented with the ox and what I think is the stag, the cerbul terin, in conditions of semi-domestication. And this is according to Bertrand, his book, De Mortale, his book, and Zaborowski, his book. And that concludes chapter 1, folks. And that concludes this video. The next one should be an analysis, unless I'm taking a walk, because that's what I'm about to do, and have a wild thought about whatever, and I present that. Peace out.